Everyone, so I just want to go through something and do something a little bit different to usual. So I've been looking at quite a few of you recently and spoken to some of you individually and looking at trying to increase your speed in the pool. And for a lot of you, the limiting factors at the moment is probably more your stroke rate than actually in your fitness. What I'm seeing and seeing a regular pattern is when we look at a pool stroke versus a open water stroke, the biggest difference is stroke rate and the kick. So a pool swimmer will typically have a really hard, fast kick and a really smooth but powerful stroke. Now when we look at the opposite, for an open water swimmer or triathlete, it should be high stroke rate with a smooth kick, no more than ideally a 2-beat kick. And what's happening is, for a lot of you, you're struggling to move away from the pool side of swimming into open water. And ideally we want to be practicing that whilst we're actually in the pool, so that once we do get into open water, that's a lot easier to do. Now, as I said, the first problem is, what ends up happening is everyone's really reliant on their kick. And what I want you to try and think about for these next couple of weeks now with your swims is, have a think about what your stroke rate is. So when you're swimming along, one thing that I particularly do, and other people have found it really useful, is they count their strokes. So as I'm swimming along, it'll be 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now when I want to increase my stroke rate, naturally, I then start to count quicker in my head. So it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Same again, if I'm doing a max effort, then it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. See what I'm trying to get at? Now another way of being able to do that is obviously with a tempo trainer. So most of you know I'm not the biggest fan of these, certainly when it comes to pacing for anything that's less than a 400 really. But I do think mode 3 on here, which is a constant beep, 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 is quite a useful tool if you don't want to count in your head. It is important to say though that shorter and taller athletes are slightly different with their stroke rates. So there isn't a perfect number. And what you tend to find is that shorter in size athletes will have a higher stroke rate, and the longer, taller athletes will then have a slower stroke rate. Now that's not to say that they're wrong, but when we're looking to increase their speed over a period of time, like, that has to increase. So the stroke rate needs to be the one that changes, not the kick. And one thing that I want you to try and take away from this video is basically, when you get in the pool over these next couple of weeks, try and be really aware of what you're doing. So count your strokes. So see, say for example, you've got a 200 meter warm up. Count what your stroke is. So as you're going along, 1, 2. What I personally like to do is I count on one side, and it marries up with then the metrics that's on Training Peaks, which is your strokes per minute. So for example, I've done a swim today and the average was 31. Now that 31 is strokes only counted on one side. So I like to go 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. Now what I find with that is then it gives me a number of how many strokes it's taken me per length, as well as obviously keeping a rhythm. But also think of it from a pacing tool. So if you're in open water and you can marry up certain paces to certain efforts to a certain stroke rate as you're swimming along in open water. My thing is 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, sight, start again. So as I'm going along, I'm literally counting in my head, and actually that then maintains my rhythm, and it actually means that I can hold a consistent pace throughout. If you don't know what your stroke rate currently is, then you can check it on Training Peaks. As I said, it's on there as RPM, and don't forget it only counts one side only, which is what comes from your Garmin. But also give it a try. Like, don't expect it to feel ridiculously great at the beginning, because you won't be used to it. So for example, if your stroke rate on average is 25, don't suddenly start to do 35. Think about smaller jumps, so start thinking maybe like 2 strokes quicker, so something like 27. It's going to take a long period of time. One of the worst things that I had when I first got back into swimming with triathlon was I had a thumb entry. So my hand used to be like this. And for 3 months straight, in my head, I used to have to say fingertips, 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 fingertips. And eventually it was never an issue. But what I'm saying is small incremental changes over a period of time is something that's well worth looking into and invested in. Somewhere between 30 to 35, you will find your sweet spot. Now, I'm not saying one number is better than the other, because obviously when you go past a certain, past that sweet spot, so say for example, your ideal stroke rate will be, I don't know, 32, but when you get to 35, if your stroke then starts to break down and then everything else falls apart with it, then obviously you're wasting energy, you're wasting your own time, and actually you're probably making yourself slower as a result. So give it a try, get in the pool, experiment a little bit, especially if you're in your off season now or it's the winter time. It's a really good time if you're away from races, just to play around with it. If you get into open water and you're currently, say for example in the UAE, and you can get into open water, play around with it there. Think about getting rhythm, because let's be honest, what's probably the biggest mistake in a triathlon? Everyone always starts off too quick. So this is one way of being able to control a little bit what you're doing. Give it a try and look forward to hearing how it goes.